I'm back, King Link here, and I'm doing part 2 of the Xbox Game Pass October 2021 review. Part 1 is already on my channel, but don't worry, you don't actually have to watch these videos in order. What happened was, Xbox released 25 titles over the last month, and I'm showing both announcements on screen right now. We've actually covered the entire first image, but we're going to have to power through the second because there's even more games not listed on that. In part 1, I've already reviewed 13 of these titles, there's 12 left, so let's talk about them and the strongest of the month. We have some of the heaviest hitters this month as well. Let's start with Scarlett Nexus, a Tales of game without being called Tales of. Scarlett Nexus is a very anime-inspired game with a large cast of characters and a huge story to tell. There's actually 2 protagonists at the beginning with players having to choose one to play as, and they appear to have 2 different stories, but fans will have to play both of their stories to learn everything. The gameplay is done like an action-based RPG, and it's well done with a focus on special abilities and mixing telekinesis with lightning attacks or such. There's a lot here, but the story, characters, and combat are all solid. There's even a dating system that allows you to build bonds with different characters to enhance their abilities. The one concern I have though is I've heard replaying the game a second time is going through a lot of the same areas, but just going through the game once is going to be substantial for most players. Pick this up if you like the Tales of series or action RPGs. The game looks great, has interesting characters, and a story I really want to know more about. It's just more of a question for me of if I'll have time for it. Astria Ascending, a textbook example of a turn-based RPG. Astria Ascending is a strange game. It starts with players taking control of a group of 8 demigods who are about to die in 3 months but use their time and power to defeat enemies known as the Noise. You're just thrust in the middle of the story here, and you'll have to connect the dots on a lot of things. There is voice acting for each character, which is pretty nice, and the story tries hard with longer cutscenes where each character gets a little development. But Astria Ascending's combat is where it's going to shine. There's a large skill tree for each character, 8 different and unique characters that all have a purpose but also have a different feeling in battle, and an overwhelming number of systems here that will likely please JRPG fans, including an all-new card-based minigame that reminds me a bit of Triple Triad that has an interesting complexity to it that you get cards from defeated enemies. The one issue though is nothing here really stands out as an amazing game. It's just what a JRPG tends to be at this point. Pick this up if you're a JRPG fan or just want a good game in the genre. There's nothing that bad here, but it is an average story and an average combat system. If you're not a huge fan of turn-based JRPGs, I'd actually probably check out Scarlett Nexus first or something else instead. AI the Somnium Files, another tale from Spike Chunsoft, the makers of Danganronpa, which means this is a dark, twisted story. AI the Somnium Files is an odd story involving robotic eyeballs that can pop out of your head, exploring dreams with your AI, and solving rather gruesome murders. The game starts with a special detective who's called in because an acquaintance of his is brutally murdered. Apparently, conflict of interest doesn't exist in this world. Players are dropped into the story here as well, but they'll learn a lot about the world through the story, and it's quite interesting. I'm actually a sucker for games that talk about delving into other characters' consciousness. Well, Psychonauts 2 did it with platforming last month, AI the Somnium File does it with a point-and-click adventure, and it's just as interesting, though this one is far darker from what I've seen. There are meaningful choices in the game, but that's because this uses a system where players have to explore all branches of each possible choice to get the real ending. Pick this up if you enjoy Spike Chunsoft's games or dark visual novels. This is far more Zero Escape than Danganronpa, but I think fans of either of those franchises will enjoy this. Like I said though, it is a dark visual novel, but it is well told, well acted, and man, it is so intriguing. It got me hooked. I'm actively playing this one right now. Marvel Avengers. Finally a chance to check out the world's greatest heroes. Now, I played this game for 2.5 hours and I actually found it quite impressive. The gameplay is good, the story is interesting, and while there are a couple issues with narrative, mostly annoying scenes that are eye-rolling, and QTEs which aren't great, I enjoyed myself. I actually liked Kamala Khan as the main character and was having fun discovering the world. But 2.5 hours was playing just the single-player campaign. Switching to the online section then for an hour and a half, and yeah, I actually saw all the problems people have. The repetitive enemies, there's no real interesting battles, it's just spammy attacks, the gear system sucks. I actually hate the fact that there's a battle card because it really provides nothing of value. The daily challenges aren't a good way to do that system in any ways. There are microtransactions for any costume worth wearing. I kind of understand every negative review there, and I could go far deeper into both sides, why it's good or bad, but I'm going to leave it there. Pick this up if you're a Marvel fan and want to only play through the campaign. You know, that's good. I don't think Gears should have been part of the single player campaign, but it is. And it's not amazing, it's just okay. The problem though is this is the Avengers. It shouldn't be just okay. As for the online though, that's everything bad about a looter shooter without any of the positives. Now the game is worth checking out, but man, I'm disappointed in what this could have been or should have been. Visage. It's Halloween time and Xbox Game Pass is apparently ready for it. Now, I normally spend between 2 and 4 hours on games for my coverage for Game Pass. I spent 17 minutes in Visage. Well, technically, I ran one time, had a glitch early on, I restarted and had 17 minutes according to my save file, and the fact is I can't play this. I was terrified and I was forced to stop myself, and that in itself is actually a very strong recommendation for the game. Visage is a horror game that, according to most people I've heard from, has a very strong horror atmosphere, and I'm going to agree with that. It was extremely effective. Sadly though, this is the first and hopefully only game I'm going to have to fail to give a solid review to because, I know in my heart I shouldn't play this, I just can't. I had to turn it off. So pick this up if you like horror. Now there's a sanity system that I really did get to see in use, there's some excellent tension building, and there wasn't any jump scares during the beginning. There was no single reason I couldn't go on, it was just the overall experience. I personally played Dolores' chapter, which is supposed to be the most atmospheric one, but, if you do like this type of thing, it's extremely good at what it does. I'm just a huge scaredy cat. Enjoy. The Procession of Calvary, Monty Python in game form. The Procession of Calvary takes the classic Monty Python art style and layers a point-and-click adventure on it. It attempts to contain that same outlandish style of writing, and it's an odd game, and, to start with, well, it looks like it could have came out of a Monty Python sketch, the humor just isn't as good. Yet I will also say I laughed quite a few times and enjoyed the experience. There's good jokes and clever puzzles. There's also a lot of moon logic, pixel hunting, and the game is kind of short. I finished my first run through in under an hour, though I did take a violent method which is ultra fast in the game. Even with the slower puzzle-based style of the game, I think it only lasted a little more than an hour for that playthrough before I reached the end. Now, this could be a longer time if you don't use any type of walkthrough because there's obtuse puzzles, but that moon logic and pixel hunting isn't really fun, and overall, the length here is still very short. Pick this up if you like point-and-click adventures. Now it is $10 to purchase as well, but it doesn't have a huge runtime, I'm serious about that. However, if you do have Xbox Game Pass and like the art style, check it out. It's not a great game, but it's still rather fun to play through and experience one time. Totally Accurate Battle Simulator. Finally a wacky physics game I can enjoy. Totally Accurate Battle Simulator is obviously tongue-in-cheek. It's a wacky physics game surrounding an interesting battle simulator. The campaign is about seeing the opponent's units and then deploying your forces in response. The first 3 levels are almost puzzles, with players needing to counter certain attacks, but before long the game feels more about just putting together interesting and unique combinations from all the tiers of characters. You also can take over control of a single unit and try to optimize their fighting. It's a fun system, though there's really only a handful of really challenging levels. It feels like the player just gets enough points to have fun with the system, and that's honestly perfectly fine. Pick this up if you like large battles. As the game goes on, you start fighting like armies of 20, and then the number keeps growing. However, it does seem like the best use of your money seems to be buying bigger units that can demolish the enemy forces. It is still fun to try out different combinations, though. Ring of Pain. Something new. Ring of Pain is a card-based roguelite focused on exploring levels rather than deck building. It has a simple rule set and a large number of different enemies, and everything looks great. There's an amazing look to every monster, and it's so addictive I couldn't put it down. I actually played 4 hours straight on stream. I almost kept playing because this game is the epitome of just one more run. Now, not everything is perfect. Some runs are going to be easier than others. I actually got an item that turned the entire game into easy mode for the run that I beat the game with, and on other runs, I actually really struggled to survive that first room. There are just times that you're going to fail with potentially no chance to survive, but part of that is why people love roguelites. You never know what you're going to find, and you're going to have to make do with the items you get. Pick this up if you like roguelites or you want to try something different. I have to say, this is fantastic, mostly because I can't really think of another game that's even close to the style or rules here, and that's what really stands out. For an overdone genre like the roguelites, this is a breath of fresh air. Back 4 Blood, the Left 4 Dead sequel that fans always wanted. Turtle Rock Studios were the studios that created Left 4 Dead and its sequel under Valve. Those were an amazing pair of games, but I really didn't recognize that same studio's skill when they made Evolve the studio's last big game. However, Back 4 Blood is Turtle Rock returning to their original form and showing their talent. This is Left 4 Dead 3 in everything but the name, of course, due to Valve owning the IP. This is zombie killing action at its best. A great multiplayer campaign that you can hang out with friends and just slaughter zombies through a huge number of progressive levels. Not everything is perfect yet. The solo campaign just gives you everything, all the cards, there's no progression system if you don't play online. Easy, called Recruit, is unchallenging until hours have passed. Medium, Veteran, is pretty brutal from the get-go. Some of that may be a need for progression, but some of it feels like there's a missing difficulty between the two options for new players. It doesn't ruin the game, but it does feel like there's some important flaws here. Pick this up if you want Left 4 Dead 3. Now, I can't imagine anyone else doing better, and they both modernized the gameplay and returned to that original amazing formula once again. If you're on Game Pass, there's no reason to skip this. If you're not, there is a decent amount of bugs, but I do feel like in maybe a month or two, everything should be ironed out. Of course, this is absolutely a game that's better with friends. I wonder if anyone's made a video about that. The Riftbreaker. RTSs and action RPGs rolled into one. The Riftbreaker starts a bit simply. Players will travel to another planet and then they need to create a rift device to return to Earth. Personally, I'd probably just stay on Earth, but then there wouldn't be much of a game, of course. Much of Riftbreaker is about resource farming, building fortifications, and bases. You're on a hostile planet and enemies are going to be coming for you, so you're going to need to protect your base and your stuff, of course. But Riftbreaker gets going once the player is forced to abandon just that turtle strategy. Instead of staying in one location, the game pushes the player to explore the rest of the world, making outposts, collecting resources, and building a massive network. It's a large, complicated game where players will learn from their mistakes, but also creating large, spawning locations, constantly fighting back alien residents on the planet, and more. Pick this up if you enjoy the defensive fortification buildings in RTSs a lot, or love the idea of a huge horde of enemies. Resource farming is important, but this is a tower defense game or a base builder. I really couldn't help but think of Factorio, but it's a little bit more like Total Annihilation or They Are Billions, maybe even a bit of Diablo without the class system thrown in there since you have a solo player as well. Destiny 2. There's loot everywhere. Destiny was one of the original looter shooters and spawned Destiny 2, the sequel. But you see, that's not what we're really talking about today. Destiny 2, that was released 4 years ago, is gone. The base game and the first 2 expansions were wiped out last year. The next 2 will be wiped out next year. The fact is, the entire original story being bolted, as they call it, is significant. What's left is a looter shooter distilled into its purest essence. You go out, you collect loot, and you hope you get some good stuff. Destiny 2 doesn't attempt to be anything but that. It feels clear that the major story is no longer a major priority to them. They're just spouting out story elements in mid-battle when it's extremely hard to hear. Is anyone noticing what's actually being said? Do they intend for players to follow the content? New content has come multiple times, but ultimately, what's here is just new reasons to go shoot stuff. Pick this up, honestly, if you have someone who wants to play Destiny 2 with you. This has AAA quality, but it wears out its welcome, and completely personal opinion, I think Warframe is a more enjoyable game than this. As bad as Avengers is, it's at least more interesting, and Borderlands is always fun to play. Even Outriders, which I'm reviewing next month, is a better game for players starting from scratch. Destiny 2 may have helped the genre, but in 2021, unless someone specifically wants to play Destiny 2 with you, I'd skip it. But that's of course my opinion. And if it does matter, the next expansion is actually not going to be free on Xbox Game Pass, so ultimately if you want to continue with the series, it's going to cost some serious cash to get all that. The Good Life, a bizarre amalgam of almost every genre. The Good Life is odd, and it starts really being hard to describe. It was promoted on Kickstarter as a life simulator. When you're playing it, there are traces of life simulator, survival gameplay, action, and more. It's not any single genre, but has traces of all of them, and the fact is, actually kind of works, but also kind of doesn't. The writing also is a little bit all over the place, but after an hour I got over that initial hill and just loved the bombastic style. The main character pretty much says every single thing I thought, and I appreciate the direct approach to the game. At the same time, there's a lot of roughness. The animations are pretty awful, art can be a mix from weak to frightful, and the controls take quite a bit to get used to. And yet, I enjoyed myself after an hour or two. Pick this up if you don't mind a rough around the edges game, or enjoyed Swery, the writer and director's previous title, particularly either Deadly Premonitions or D4 Dark Dreams Don't Die. I didn't like either of those though, but I still enjoyed this. Maybe I evolved, maybe this is just slightly better, but I do think people should give this one a shot though. To repeat, it is a very rough game at times. And that's the last of the 25 titles. So what about this month as a whole? Honestly, there's an absolute metric ton of games. The first 13 were smaller indie titles, but having to cover Marvel Avengers, Destiny 2, and Back 4 Blood all back to back was pretty crazy. Last month I was a little underwhelmed. This month there were some major titles, so much better. That being said, I wasn't a huge fan of everything here. There were 3 roguelites, and I feel like the number of them is growing out of control. At the same time, I actually enjoyed 2 of them this month, and getting to check out some major indie titles as well is really nice. I'm just going to get to the games that I recommend. Honestly, there are 6 games I'm struggling over this month. I could remove any of them from my top list, but I also could put all of them on the list. I only really ranked 5 games, but Tainted Grail of Conquest is on the screen, so don't know how that happened, but I guess I should say something. Tainted Grail of Conquest is a solid roguelite. The graphics are really good, but the blending of Slay the Spire and the improvements on that formula really make it a strong offering. It's got an addictive feel, and that 9 characters that are all going to be different means there's always something more to do. I'm going to be calling the rest of these games the strongest games, but think of them as more the strongest recommendations. With the 5th strongest game this month being AI the Somnium Files. This will probably not appeal to everyone, but the dark gritty story here is well told. I actually played 10 hours or so on this and I'm hooked. I want to know more, and while it is gruesome at times, it's also extremely compelling. The 4th strongest game this month is Superliminal. This is a very solid puzzle game with excellent writing. I recommend people go in as fresh as they can into the game, which is the reason why I'm not showing too much of it. The 3rd strongest game this month is Ring of Pain. This is a surprise. I technically reviewed this for Humble Choice right before these videos, and I said I wasn't sure after about an hour. 4 hours later, I've completely fell for this game. It's a great, fresh roguelite that deserves more attention. If you enjoy roguelites, it's worth checking out. The 2nd strongest this month is Scarlett Nexus. This is a well-designed RPG with a good story and interesting characters. I'm really curious where it's going to go, and I'm looking forward to finding out one day, but the art and the combat are so compelling, it's worth checking out. The strongest game of this month is Subnautica Below Zero. This is a beautiful sequel with a rich world to explore, and there's tons for players to do. The vast depth, the interesting creatures, and the dangerous environments will keep you entertained. Or at least that's kind of my list. Usually I have very strong opinions on these games. Even with a large list like this, I should be able to decide the best, but every game on the list has moved around quite a bit. Every time I've looked at the list, even recording this, I'm now considering, is Subnautica the best? More games probably deserve checking out as well this month. On screen is Back 4 Blood. If you have a group of friends, please check that out. Visage was perfect for Halloween. There's Sable that has a great atmosphere. That's also really good. There was so much variety that it feels like there's something for everyone. Multiplayer, FPSs, base building, horror. Throw a dart at the list, you'll probably find something, which is still why I like to do the individual reviews for all of you. If you enjoyed this video, thanks for sticking around. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and ringing that bell. Let me know which games you're most excited for or enjoyed. On the other hand, if you haven't already seen it, part 1 of this was 13 very solid indie titles. I'll pop that up on the screen, along with a video about Better with Friends. Destiny 2, Back 4 Blood, and Marvel Avengers probably all fit that bill. Definitely worth checking that out if you're interested in what I'm talking about there. And thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.